think part of the insidiousness of the success of the Lost Cause project, and the success of history of white supremacy attempting to distort and manipulate history more generally, is that I didn't really have any consciousness of what those statues were or what they represented. I think all the time about how the statue of P.G.T. Beauregard sits in the in front of City Park, where I would go and like feed the ducks and the geese with my mom on the weekends, and that I was literally feeding the ducks under the statue of a man who ordered the first attack that opened the Civil War. But I had no conception of who that person was. He was part of, he felt like he was just part of what ornamented the entire city, which are these statues of white men on pedestals. And so it wasn't until my adulthood that I feel like I gained a more acute understanding of who these people were and what they stood for. And part of the thing is that part of what white supremacy attempts to do is take empirical statements and turn them into ideological ones, right? So if I say the Confederacy was a treasonous territory that seceded from the Union and raised an army predicated on maintaining and expanding the institution of slavery, in a lot of circles, that would be perceived as an ideological statement. And if I'm in a classroom, that would be perceived as me attempting to indoctrinate students with my political beliefs, when it's actually just reflective of the empirical and historical evidence that we have, right? Like the Confederacy said it for themselves. If you look at the Declarations of Confederate Secession in 1861, they say it. A state like Mississippi says, quote, "Our position is thoroughly aligned with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interests of the world." All right, so they were not vague about why they were seceding from the Union. They were quite clear about it. But part of what has happened over the course of more than a century now is that those stories and that sort of evidence, that sort of primary source evidence, is not presented to students. And so the narrative of the Confederacy being this thing that was just fighting for states' rights, or Robert E. Lee being an honorable man who was just doing right by his community, or that this war was a war of northern aggression rather than one that was predicated on these folks leaving the country in order to sustain this abominable social and economic practice, it gets muddled, right? It becomes a sort of Orwellian thing where it's not even meant to turn everybody into racist. It's just meant to make people confused, to the point where in 2018, you have a study from the Southern Poverty Law Center that shows that only 8% of US high school seniors are able to identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War, because our teaching around it has been so, people are either scared to address it at all, right, for fear that something will happen. And I think we see in state legislatures across the country an intentional effort to amplify and magnify that chilling effect, to make teachers scared to even touch this stuff, so that you continue to have young people growing up with a skewed sense of what the Confederacy was, what slavery was, and thus how it has shaped the social, economic, and political landscape of our country today.